I'm James Hahn II, and you're listening to the Oil and Gas This Week podcast, brought to you by Redwing. This is episode 53.5. 0.5 episodes are my chance to speak with entrepreneurs, executives, and thought leaders from inside and outside the industry to hear their stories, what inspires their work, what culture drives their company, what innovations they're bringing to the oil field. My guest today is Victor Antonio. Victor came from a poor upbringing in one of the roughest areas of Chicago, but that didn't stop him from earning his BS in electrical engineering and his MBA. He went on to build a 20-year career as a top sales executive and became president of global sales and marketing for a $420 million company and subsequently CEO of a multi-million-dollar high-tech enterprise. Never one to rest on his laurels, Victor moved on to become vice president of international sales in a $3 billion Fortune 500 company, where he was selected from over 500 sales managers to join the President's Advisory Council for Excellence in Sales and Management. Victor has conducted business in Europe, Asia, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Latin America, the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates, and South Africa. He can now add TV host to his resume because his new show, Life or Debt, debuts on Spike TV this Sunday, March 13th. Victor Antonio, welcome to the Oil and Gas This Week podcast. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, my man.
I'm glad to be here, James. Looking forward to this conversation.
It has been quite some time since we first met back in 2009. I saw the documentary that was made on you. I said, I got to be friends with this guy.
Right. The Motivator. You saw my documentary, The Motivator.
I did. I saw the documentary, The Motivator, and I was trying my first business, and I was like, I'm just gonna fake it till I make it. I'm gonna get on the phone with this guy, and we're gonna become friends. And by my dumb luck, it has happened, and a lot has changed since then. But let's start back with your story because, well, first of all, we have to preface this because you do have a show coming out. It's debuting on Spike TV called Life or Debt, and it debuts March 13th. Is that right?
That is correct, James.
I remember talking to you back when you were doing, it was more than a year ago when you were doing the pilots, and I can't wait for the show. But you have a very fascinating backstory before you became the big time celebrity that's giving me a hard time before we press record. So tell us where you come from, Victor.
All right. Born and raised in Chicago. My family's originally from Puerto Rico, but I was born in Chicago near the Humboldt Park area, which is really not too far, from the Cabrini Green, that kind of a little triangle area there. And I went to William H. Wells High School. So back in the day, it was a little rough neighborhood, if you know what I mean. It was really the hood. And so we didn't have a lot of money growing up. And I remember, the food stamps and stuff like that. So we struggled. I always got the hand-me-downs because I was the youngest of, 7. And so it was always interesting. So mom was always like, go to school, get the education, get the job. So I went to school, got the education, have an electrical engineering degree and an MBA. Did corporate America, did that for a while. I hated engineering when I first got into it. I did it for the money, James, which is not always a good reason to do something. 3 years into my gig, I said, I hate this. And I started meandering in different positions. But when I found sales, it's like, I always say I hit that hyper pad. I found my thing, the thing I'm good at. And from there, everything took off, became, director of sales, vice president of sales and marketing, and then eventually a CEO of a technology company out of Virginia. And then back in 2001, May 9th, 2001, 3:48 p.m. to be exact, I walked away. And it was simply because I wanted to do other things. I wanted to write books. I wanted to reach back into the neighborhood and help other people. And that's been a 15-year journey now. So it's been a very interesting career path.
I want to go back to the beginning, though, because
when I was born?
Where you grew up, because it's very interesting to me that now you have this Life or Debt series coming out, and you grew up in poverty in Chicago. And what was it like for you growing up? I mean, you lived in the projects?
No, no, no. We were near the projects. Like I said, the Cabrini Green housing projects were about, I say about a mile or two from us, maybe three. They're no longer there. They tore them down. And for us, it was just, I mean, what is poor be like? When you're a kid, you don't realize that you're poor. You just know you don't have a lot of things. But back in the day, before video games and all these other things, electronic devices, you would go outside and you're on the street all the time. You play kick the can, kick ball, play baseball, games like pinners, fastball pitching with a rubber ball. You find ways to entertain yourself. And so even though we didn't have a lot, at the time, you don't realize you're poor. You're just growing up. It really starts hitting you that you're poor when you get to high school, because then the peer pressure kicks in and the comparisons begin. You know how people like different clothing and you realize you can't afford the clothing. I remember that I realized I was poor because I always wanted a pair of Chuck Taylors, right? Converse All-Stars, right?
Right.
And my older brother got a pair and my mother couldn't afford to buy me a pair. So she took me over to the store it was like a 5 and dime store called Jupiter. And she got me one of those, really low cost gym shoes that had the plastic bottoms that every time you tried to stop in a gym, if you're on a wooden floor, you'd slide, And I remember everybody making fun of my cheap gym shoes all the time. And it's just, they didn't have the $20 at the time, whatever they cost to buy a pair of, Chuck Taylor's Converse All-Stars. So, those are things where you start realizing, okay, maybe we don't have a lot of money. I remember having patches in my pants. Yes, when I had a hole in my pants, my mother would put patches. I just remember all these little things that just reminded us that, okay, we don't have that much money. But, it was a good upbringing, though, given the limited resources.
So was that what informed your decision in engineering? You said, all right, I realize I don't have money. I want money. Engineers make money. I'm going to go become an engineer.
Yeah, it was pretty much that. But let me put some texture to that. My father was working at a place called the Acme Frame Plating Company, and it was like a dirty job. It was beyond blue collar. I always said it was black collar because it was dirty. You know what? It was like a dirty factory. And I remember he would come home. His hands were always like gnarled, real callous. And he would always like blow his nose and just black stuff would come out. And I remember my older brother dropped out of high school and he had to go work at the factory with my father, and he didn't like that after a year. And I'm almost sure he regretted leaving high school. So when any thought of high school dropping out for me, the thought of dropping out of high school rather, was pretty much a moot point, because my mother would remind me, if you drop out of high school, you have to go work with your father at the factory. I'm like, whoa, I'm not doing that. And then when I graduated from high school, my mother was like, well, if you don't go to college, you got to go work at the factory with your father. So I'm like, let's go to college. And I remember I was sitting in my physics class in high school, and I had to pick a college, right? And so there were these advertisements on the wall, the what do you call those, the cork boards. Mm-hmm. And I saw, Illinois Institute of Technology. And I remember I asked my teacher, hey, is this a good school? He's like, it's a very good school. It's an engineering school. I said, do engineers make a lot of money? He said, yes, they do, Victor. And I still remember to this day, I went through that bingo card, I call it, where you can check out if you want more information on civil engineering, mechanical engineering, send you the application plus more information, right? I didn't know what civil engineers were. I didn't know really what mechanical engineers did. The only thing that resonated with me was electrical engineering. And then I asked again, do electrical engineers make a lot of money? He's like, yeah, they make pretty good money. Boom, in, I'm done. Fill out the form, send it in. And I remember I applied to 2 colleges. And the reason I chose IIT is that the other one wanted a matriculation fee, in other words, fee to, say I'm committed to go to your school, of $250, and IIT only wanted like $50. And all I could afford was $50, or all my parents could afford was $50. So that's how I chose my college.
How did you pay to get through college?
We were so poor. I applied for I had Pell Grants, every type of government grant. I wound up, just to put it in today's dollars, I wound up owing, when I graduated, only 1 year's worth of tuition.
Wow.
Which wasn't much. So at the time, when I was paying for college tuition, just to show you how out of whack things are now, my annual tuition was almost like $5,000. I think it was like $4,800 a year. Maybe it went up to like $5,000. But I graduated only owing about $5,000. A far cry from what you see today. So
you graduate from college and then go where?
I get an engineering degree. During that time, during college, I interned at a lot of different companies. I worked at Channel 5, WMAQ in Chicago, the Merchandise Mart. I was actually running the camera for the 5, 6, and 10 News as part of my
Really?
internship program. Yes. That was my first exposure to TV and behind the scenes. And then I worked for a company out of Burns Harbor, Indiana during the summer called Bethlehem Steel. First time I've ever been in a steel mill. Amazing people, amazing production and facility. And then I got a summer job working for Honeywell in their undersea systems division. That was the division that actually produced the torpedoes, the Mach 46 and the Mach 50 torpedoes. If you saw the movie Hunt for Red October, the American sub was actually firing Mach 46 torpedoes. And so I was working on some of the software algorithm for that torpedo system, or the newer version rather, for the Mach 50. And so when I graduated from college, there was a job offer waiting for me to go work at their test center, where we would test components that would go into all the munitions and all the military equipment.
It's really interesting because Honeywell has a very strong presence in oil and gas.
Do they? I didn't know that, James.
Yes, they do. And you're talking to a lot of engineers right now, so I think they understand where you're coming from.
Oh, again, I loved engineering. I worked in the electronic test center, where again we would test all the what they call discrete or digital components that went through the system, but everything from the electrical side to the environmental side on testing, thermal shock, heats, and all that. And so it was really fascinating to find out all about, quality assurance at that time. That was starting to become very big before Six Sigma. And so total quality management, was a Malcolm Baldrige Award. I think we won it one time. So, I got to appreciate quality production at an early age.
And how long were you climbing the corporate ladder before you went out on your own?
Well, think about it. So I graduated in 86 December. So I started in 87 officially, January of 87. So all the way through 2001. So I can't do math right now, but I think that's 17 years?
Yeah.
That's right?
17? Somewhere around there.
So that's how long. And so the first, again, 3 years, maybe 4, but I think it's more like 3. I was in engineering, and it was hardcore engineering. We were like programming, these testers to test components. We were doing circuit board testing, and we were always writing programs out. And I realized it just wasn't me. And so then they moved me into why don't you supervise the test facility for us, Victor? So then I moved into a supervisory role, which was good because I got to really get a bigger view of all the things that are done within a facility. Excuse me. And then I kind of said, man, I'm not digging this either. And then I moved over to a wireless company. I left Honeywell, went over to a wireless company, and I became an application engineer designing wireless systems for the public safety market. So for police officers and, fire departments. And so I worked in that market. So I would actually design the actual systems, everything from the base stations to the antennas, the towers, and all that good stuff. And I liked application engineering because it wasn't so detailed. It was a little more removed from the bits and the bytes. And now it was almost like putting a system together. And I really enjoyed that more. And if I could just take one step further, once I did that, I became very good at it. When I was at the company called E.F. Johnson, which is still around in Minnesota, a sales position opened up in Latin America. And they were looking for a person who was an engineer and could speak Spanish. And I was like, hello. And at that time, around that time, we had our first child and my wife wanted to stay home and we wanted to make money. So let me see. Technology background, he speaks Spanish, and he needs to make money. Yeah, that's me again. Right. And that's how I got into sales.
And how did your journey work out with money, taking the transition from out of the hood, if you will?
Yeah.
Because I know for myself personally, I'm still working on this, where I grew up in a household that had a horrible philosophy around money. I've heard it, I don't even know how many thousands of times. It's just money. It comes and it goes. And
we would always hear money doesn't grow on trees. That's the one.
So did you grow up then knowing how to save and how to take care of your money?
No, not really. I'd like to tell you I did, but I didn't. The way I would make money is I would hustle for money. So, for example, one of my first jobs was a newspaper, kid. But I hated it because you had to go pick up the money. Remember, I don't know if you know that back in the day, you had to actually go collect the money. And sometimes you had to knock on doors. And depending on what you collected, it basically determined how much you got paid. So I didn't like that. So I still remember also like collecting bottles Remember back in the day when people collected bottles just
Oh
to
yeah,
have, some
well,
pennies in your
up
pocket?
in Illinois and Michigan, not,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
down
yeah.
here in Texas, but
Okay, but yeah,
but
so
yeah.
collect bottles. I used to collect cans. I remember. I remember I spent the whole day collecting cans. Took it over to the junkyard. Right, big bag. Right, and the guy gave me like, I don't know. I'm going to say like 75 cents. I'm like, are you kidding me? And so the next time, what I did was, and this is so wrong, and I do not recommend this because this is so wrong. What I did back then, is that I got the idea. File this under innovation. I got the idea to put mud in the cans, right?
Oh,
And then I would smash the cans, right, and let them dry. And they were much heavier when I took them to the junkyard. It's
just
so
a
wrong.
poor kid
It's so
hustling
wrong.
for some cash, though.
Yeah. So I made a little more money that way. But we were never taught to save because there was nothing to save, and everything was always on the layaway plan. Do you remember back in the day where you bought a pair of pants and you had to put it on layaway?
I bought my first television on layaway.
Yeah, and but back where I was at, you couldn't take it home.
No.
I don't know if you knew that. You had to leave it there, right?
Yeah.
You had to keep paying for it until you finally paid it. Then you could get it. By that time, it was out of fashion because it took so long to actually pay for the clothes. But I mean, that was the thing, that we were that, financially in the hole sometimes. And I remember there were times where, our neighbors would sneak food to us. My father would get mad because my father, early on had a drinking problem. And so he would drink a lot of the money. And I can only imagine because of the stress he must have been going under, the stress he was under. And so, we would try to make ends meet, man. I mean, it was, everybody had to get a job. Everybody had to go to work just to bring some money home. And sometimes we had to wait, I remember, to the end of the month to get some food. We were so excited when the food stamps came at the end of the month because, man, the pantry was dry, if you know what I mean. There was nothing in there. And, growing up, all I knew was rice and beans. I believe that rice and beans was with everything. It's all automatic. Your chicken, rice and beans. Pork chops, rice and beans. Everything. Spaghetti, rice and beans.
Spaghetti.
You know what I mean? I mean, everything. You don't understand, James. It was all about the rice and the beans. Because my mother would buy this 100-pound bag of rice that would basically sustain us for a whole month. No joke. I mean, it was we lived lean, and we never look. I went to my first restaurant to eat, like an official sit-down restaurant. I went in my second year of college. That's when I got the intern at NBC. Because and I remember when I sat down at the restaurant for the first time, it was like, wow. So this is a restaurant. I mean, think about that, James.
Wow.
I'm like 1920. And
Wow.
I remember the lady comes over, and I was with somebody, and she looks at me and she goes, would you like a carafe of water? And I said, and I'm thinking, did she just say giraffe? I'm not making this up. And I go, and I remember I looked at her, I go, what's that? And she goes, a carafe of water. I'm like, what's that? I didn't even know what the word appetizer was. I'm not making this up, James. I'm just telling you, I went through a culture shock when I started working and really getting out of the hood, because college took me out of the hood, right? And so now I'm 19, I'm in college, and that took me out of the hood. And that's when I really began experiencing life outside the hood.
So you were 19 until you sat down in a restaurant for the first time?
That's correct. You get a hot dog at the corner store. Chicago's known for their great hot dogs, right?
Yes.
But that's the first time I've ever been in a restaurant. Like, we didn't have sit-down meals. You know what I mean? At the table.
Right.
We didn't sit down together because everybody was always doing something. We never got together as a family to sit down and have dinner and polite conversation. It's weird. You know what I mean?
Well, everybody had to hustle.
Right. And so I remember when I met my wife, and we went to her house for dinner for the first time, and I'm like, oh my God, they actually sit down at the same time, at the same table. They say grace. It may sound petty, but I'm just telling you, this is real. This is what I went through. All this was like a new world, because you're so busy hustling just to make ends meet.
So then once you started making money, did you just blow through it?
No, I don't think I ever blew through. I've never been in serious debt. I've never been in serious debt. The only stupid decision I made was when I graduated from college and I bought a new RX-7. I had to pay $357 every month for 5 years. I'll never do that again. But, it was always like we were always breaking even. And then when me and my wife got together, I met her in my last year of college. And We got married about 2 years later after I graduated. And when we had our first child, we were struggling. Even with the job, we were struggling. I mean, sometimes we had about $100 in the bank only. That was it. And sometimes we had to borrow $100 or $2, $100 or $200 because of, we were struggling early on. But we were never in debt, though. That was the good thing.
You knew or you learned to not take on credit cards in debt?
I think we learned. I'd like to tell you that I knew that intuitively, but I learned. And I think that first car payment or that first car and their payments, I said, I'll never do that again. And so we've always strived to be zero debt. And so we've been zero debt for, I don't know, I'm going to say at least 10 years, maybe more, close to 15. By zero debt, I mean everything's paid off, which means you zero out everything at the end of the month. We're talking mortgage, car payments, everything.
The reason The reason I'm bringing this up is because it's a difficult time for a lot of people in the oil field right now.
Right.
Prices are low in the upstream oil field, I should say. Midstream is doing relatively well. Downstream, they're printing money downstream. But there's a lot of layoffs and there's a lot of people struggling. And you see a lot of these oil field memes and so forth of the oil field at $100 a barrel, and there's a big mega truck there, and then it's the oil field today, and it's somebody eating ramen noodles or something.
Right.
And it breaks my heart because these guys make so damn much money when they're out there in the field.
Right.
And I don't know how many of us in this industry plan for the future. Because this is a cyclical market. If you're reliant on upstream, you're going to go through boom and bust. Yep. And if you don't store that away, it's going to be difficult for you. So that's kind of why I'm digging into all of this with you, because it's interesting to hear where you came from and what those of us in the oil field, and even myself personally, I'm still admittedly working on getting my finances together so that I can not be struggling when maybe that client doesn't come through or whatever that month. So at what point in your career did you really start to understand money?
My wife gets a lot of credit for that because she was early on. She hates bills. She hates paying finance fees, on credit cards and things like that. So early on, she was more like that. My wife is like the definition of frugal. I mean, if you look at the dictionary, looking them up in the dictionary, you're going to see her face in there because she's very frugal. And I've always enjoyed that about her because she's one of these people that doesn't like to overspend and just buys enough all the time. And so she's never been about, and I think I've learned a lot from her because she's never been, some people who are just flamboyant, have to have the latest purses with the latest name brands and all that stuff. She's just not like that. She's very simple, but yet classy. And she doesn't like to spend money on things that don't need to be bought. And so, in this show, Life or Debt, referencing the show, is that we work with a lot of families who didn't put the money away. Well, let's look at why they didn't put the money away. Well, they were trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? They were living beyond their means. Everything was on the credit card, and you buy things you don't really need. And I'll tie this back to what happened back in 2000. Was it 2001 when the market crashed? 2000, I think it was 2001 was the tech bubble. In 2007, 2008, the market crashed again, right? And what happened, by the way, excuse my voice. I've been talking all day since yesterday, so I apologize. One of the things I learned early on is the zero debt. And I had friends who would tell me I was an idiot. Said, Victor, you got to have all your money in your house, right? All that money's just sitting there, not doing anything. And I came from a very low income family. I want security, James. That's how I tie in what happened to my, how my upbringing conditioned me. I don't trust anything. When you're poor and you live a life of insecurity, where you don't know where your next meal's coming from, where you don't know what you can afford, where you don't know if the landlord's going to kick us out because we never owned a home, right? It was just apartment to apartment to apartment, right? When you get to my age, you wanted to have your own house. People didn't understand that. I didn't care if I could use that money or leverage it to do other things with it. I wanted a house that I knew was mine. And that was the driving force to own it. And so if somebody's listening to this and, they're in a big house they can't afford, get the hell out of the big house. Go find a small house you can afford. Pay that thing off. Because once you have your home base secure, James, and I think this is something people don't think about, when you have everything paid off, okay? And again, some debt is okay. If it's rotating debt, but if you clear out at the end of the month, you're not paying a lot of interest, that's okay. But, if you have a house right now and move to something that you can afford, once you can afford your lifestyle and begin to reduce your debt, put that under your control, what happens, James, is now you can make better decisions about your future. In other words, because I didn't have debt, I decided I wanted to do a lot of public speaking. Well, as you know, the public speaking world is not just turn on the switch and you start making money.
It takes years.
Yes. Now, if I was in debt in the hole, I would never have made that decision. But because I was financially stable, I can make a better decision and take more risks. See, this is the true cost of debt. And that is, you are not allowed to take chances, risks. Try something new because you're so in debt, you're worried. And I think that robs us of our dreams, of things we want to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense because as Zig Ziglar would say, money isn't everything, but it ranks right up there with oxygen.
Correct.
And money gives you the freedom to be able to make decisions to go and do what you want to do, follow your dreams and so forth, or even just keep up a standard of living, an acceptable standard of living, whatever that means to you, to plan for that.
That's it right there. It's a standard, what it means to you, not what it means to other people or how people view you. I drive a Volvo. That's a 2000 Volvo, James. That means it's 16 years old. I'm still driving it. I'm about to hit 200,000 miles on this bad boy. And I always get the question, why don't you buy a new car, Victor? I'm like, why? I said, this one runs just fine. Do you see the mindset? It's just a different mindset.
And if that's going to be, if I were to jump in there, that's got to be a little different than some of your neighbors because you live in a pretty nice neighborhood in Georgia.
My neighbors have a Porsche, has a Cayenne Porsche. He drives this little Audi also as a sports car just because for shits and grins. You know what I mean? But I don't care what he drives. You know what I mean? That's how I look at it. I don't care. And if I can tell you this quick story to really drive home how I learned this lesson from my wife. We've been out together almost 30 years now, so I've learned a lot from her. And I remember when we were starting out, we bought her a second car, right? Now imagine, I had the new RX-7. She has this Buick Skylark. We're living in Minnesota. This thing has so many rust holes in it, right? It's just ugly. One day I'm by the kitchen window, I'm looking out at the car, right? And I tell my wife, I said, we need to get you a new car. And she says, why? She goes, I said, well, what do you mean why? Just look at it. Now, what you needed to know about this car, James, is that inside, it was immaculate. But outside, it was horrible, right? So I said, we need to get a new car. She goes, why? She goes, well, look at it. I said, look at it. It looks horrible. She goes, well, what do I care? I'm on the inside looking out. I don't ever have to look at it. Now think about that for a second. My brain just locked up. What my wife taught me was that I don't care what other people think of it. What I see is fine. And isn't that an interesting paradigm shift?
It changes everything because if you're keeping up with the Joneses, you're always going to be in debt.
In this show, we talk about that 75% of American families live in paycheck to paycheck, right? Most of them don't even have $1,000 to cover an emergency. So think about that. 75% are struggling. So when you look around your neighborhood, guess what? 3 out of those 4 houses are struggling. So you're trying to keep up with Joneses who are broke. It's almost like we're feeding on each other. It's a fascinating stat.
Yeah, you see that all over Houston where I look around, I see really expensive cars and all the other things that go along with it, the bags and the so forth. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me because there are people here that have money. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of people with money, but you can't really tell who is the actual baller, if you will.
Yeah.
Because there's so many of us Americans are living in debt that you look at okay, so you're driving a new, I don't, whatever the, a Bentley or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
And I'm going, I don't even know if you can afford that car.
Yeah, it's probably leased, right? Lease equals fleeced because that's what they're doing. They're fleecing you for your money. But again, it's all about the image, right? It's all about you want people to perceive you in a certain way. And I see that a lot. When we work with these families, so we worked with 11 families, and I remember one in particular, if you saw these family, James, you would swear this is like the ideal family. Beautiful Caucasian couple, right? He was like an Adonis, just a handsome dude, 6'3", right? She was like a prom queen or something, right? Beautiful couple, gorgeous couple, 4 kids, 4 beautiful kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, beautiful kids, beautiful house, the white picket fence, lovely cars, and the dog named Boo to complete the set. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you look at this and you're like, this is a perfect family. Until I go in there and I start scratching the surface just a little bit. And guess what? It wasn't perfect. No savings, in debt, that were going into the hole every month. But from the outside, damn, they look good. And that's what I see now. See, after doing this show, I really now see people in a whole different light. I now admire people who are, if you drive a nice, expensive car, it doesn't impress me. The only thing that impresses me is the size of your bank account. And remember the book that came out, I think it was back in 1995 or something like that, The Millionaire Next Door?
Yes.
Remember that? They talked about the average millionaire drives a 2-3-year-old pickup truck, wears jeans, buys them over at Walmart, doesn't spend a lot of money. He's socking away money, right? And so I think this show is about getting back to the basics and stop trying to live somebody else's dream. So if somebody in the oil and gas industry is listening to this and they've just been laid off, that's unfortunate because now it might be tough to get another job. But if you still have a job today, man, start cutting back on your expenses. Start living within your means. Stop trying to impress people. You know what I mean? If you got to move to a smaller house, that's okay. Just try to pay things off. Look, we got a recession coming down the road. It could be next year, 2 years from now. It's coming, James. You know it is.
Definitely.
Something's not right. Wages have stagnated since the 1970s, right? This is kind of how it's all works. Since the 1970s, wages haven't really gone up. So what happens? 2 people now go to work instead of 1, right? Because that was it, dual income families, right? So because people want to maintain their lifestyle. So the wife or the husband had to go to work now. So what happened? Once again, inflation kicks in again, that wasn't enough. So then people move on to credit cards, right? They start putting stuff down on credit cards. Well, after they exhaust their credit cards and they still can't keep up, they start using their house like an ATM machine, right? Taking out, second mortgages, right? Equity loans, right? And then what happens? The collapse and everything just falls apart like the house of cards. And so what's happening now is that, I don't care what the unemployment number is. That's a bogus number, right? That 4 point whatever it is. So it's such a bogus number. We have the lowest job participation rate in 30 years. The wages that people are earning are nowhere near what they were earning, let's say 5 to 7 years ago. And inflation is real. All you got to do is go to the grocery store to see that your $100 doesn't buy you that 4 or 5 bags of groceries that it used to.
Just trying to buy some bacon is a come on, man. Checking the price of bacon going, come on, I'm just want some bacon. But
I'm looking at the media and they make it sound like everything's fine. I'm like, no, everybody knows intuitively something's wrong. I'm going to the grocery store and I can't buy as much as I used to buy. What happened? And my wages haven't gone up. My house is still expensive. Property taxes are going up. I don't even want to talk about Obamacare and what that's done, especially to people who are self-employed, who are 1099s. I mean, it's amazing how all these costs are just going up and how some people do it is amazing. So I always get back to the fact, start reducing your debt load. Just start, really just start getting rid of stuff, and just start paying things down.
And I just went through that in my move. I was amazed at how many things I had in my house that because I was going, okay, I got to give the new landlord $1,200, and okay, let me sell this. I ended with $1,500, and things that were just sitting in my house that I just didn't use.
Yeah.
And I got to imagine that's the case for the majority of Americans.
Absolutely. We found that one of the things we do when we work with this family is that we look for the hidden assets in their house. And we find on average, we could find like maybe $2,000 to $3,000 worth of hidden assets, in their house. And what we do is we take them to consignment or, stores to sell, or we just try to sell them outright. and then we use that money to pay down some of their debt. That's part of the strategy of life or debt.
And so moving forward, I mean, you've enlightened us with a lot today. What would you say then? It sounds like we've maybe covered it already. The one thing that you learned from working with these families that anyone in the oil field could take away.
I think there's a lot of things. So it's a tough question, but I want to put a top spin, if not an emphasis on this. We always believe that our house is our biggest investment, right? I no longer believe that. I used to also repeat that line. I now believe that the biggest investment is the individual, right? And your job. And by that I mean is that if you're in the oil and gas industry or any industry and you just do a particular job, I would take care to try to learn other types of jobs within that field. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Really expand my knowledge, really try to become more valuable. So if I only know about drilling, then I want to know what's beyond drilling. You know what I mean? I want to know about operations. I want to know about costs. I want to know about how things work. I want to know more. In other words, instead of just doing my job, I want to learn everything around my job so I create more value for myself and my bosses will notice that. And if you're thinking, well, my boss won't notice it, well, it doesn't matter. Even if you go to another job, you're taking all this skill set with you, right? This new amplified skill set with you to another job. So if you're listening, and you're in that position where you're learning something, try to learn more. Invest in yourself, take an extra course, just learn different things or try different positions, by the way, within a company. And that's one of the things I did early on, James. I forgot to mention that. When I decided I didn't want to be an engineer, I moved around a lot within Honeywell. And I played different positions, to put it that way. And that allowed me to get an understanding of different aspects of the business. And that just made me more valuable over time. And I remember we went through a downsizing. And I was one of the few people who didn't get cut, and it could have been my salary, but I think it was also because I knew a lot about the business. I can work different positions. So for those folks listening, learn how to play different positions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We just mentioned that on the career show a couple of weeks ago where Mark was talking to someone and the particular company in the industry is laying people off, but the person that he knew was interviewing for a promotion that same day.
Look at that. Yeah.
And so it just reinforces your point. You got to be a lifelong learner and you got to get to know everything about what you do so that you increase your value. And,
Absolutely.
And the more you increase your value, the more back to that. Obviously, we know that security doesn't actually exist in this world, but the more secure you can be. Victor, thank you for enlightening us today and for being on the show. I can't thank you enough, brother. I really look forward. Actually, March 13th is my sister's birthday, so it's a nice birthday present for her, and I can't wait for this. Do you know what time and how people can tune in?
It's going to be on Spike TV, March 13th, this next Sunday, not this Sunday, next Sunday, March 13th. It's going to premiere at 10 p.m. Eastern time, right after bar rescue time, 9 o'clock Central.
Perfect. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you or get to know you more, where would you send them?
VictorAntonio.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Victor.
Thank you, James. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening to this 0.5 episode of the Oil and Gas This Week podcast. Join us again tomorrow when we will talk to James Wanjama, as we promised, about his passion for oil and gas and how it was cultivated growing up in rural Kenya with no running water or electricity until he was a teenager. Until then, go find some grease, guys.